Hello and welcome once again, my grade 5 and 6 boys and girls. It's time for another exciting lesson for our literacy with me, Ms. Shamsuddin. Now today, we are going to be going back to our passage, A Kitchen Garden. Remember, one of the famous sayings I always leave with you is, a child who reads will become an adult who thinks. Let me say that again. A child who reads will become an adult who thinks. Now, when we dealt with the passage of the kitchen garden before, we would have read the passage entirely, and then we would have looked at suffixes and inflectional endings that were used in the passage. Now today, we're going to be analyzing the story once again, but this time, we're going to be answering a few comprehension questions based on the story. Now, as we answer the questions, we will focus on the location or sections in which the information can be found. Now, let's get into our reading. A Kitchen Garden. Jack always boasted to his friends at school about his lovely kitchen garden. His teacher intervened. She told him to seek permission from his parents to have the class visit the garden. Permission was granted, and Jack got the chance to show off his garden to his friends. Jack first took them to a shaded section by the side of the house, and here he made some introductory remarks about the garden. Our garden is situated at the back of the house. Before the plot was made into a garden, it was full of weeds and grass, which my father and I cleared away. I worked with my father when I got home from school and also at weekends. After the grass and weeds were removed, we planted our garden site. We dug drains and made rows of beds. We plowed those beds and collected manure, which was spread over them. We selected a shaded section in the garden where we decided to grow young seedlings before planting them permanently in the garden beds. The plants, which will grow into vines and climbers, we planted near the garden fence or allowed to run on an arbor, which we built. We dug a drain to get water to wet the plants. Here in the section where we have the seed boxes, we sow seeds in these boxes and cover them with coconut leaves to prevent too much sunlight from getting to them. When the seedlings are strong enough, these tender plants are transplanted to the bed selected for them. We continue to put covers on them until they are sturdy. Jenny, what about that section over there? What kind of plants are growing there? Jack took them nearer. There they saw beds with many kinds of vegetables. On each bed grew a particular vegetable. There were vegetables such as callaloo, peppers, cabbage, okras, tomatoes, and bora. Jason, why are those plants growing flat on the ground? Jack responded, oh, those are cucumbers and pumpkin plants. They run along the ground. But if you look across there next to the fence, you will see squash and Karila plants. Jenny, but Jack, these plants are quite green. They look very healthy. How have you been able to keep them looking like this? Jack responded, well, we have been very careful with our garden. Our plants always get a sufficient supply of water to increase fertility of the soil. Cow manure is always added, and weeds are always controlled by cutting them frequently. My daddy dislikes the use of insecticides and fertilizers. Jason asked, what do you do with the produce from the garden? And Jack responded, our garden produces more than we can use. We sell some of the vegetables, We give some to our neighbors and relatives, and we use some ourselves. The teacher: well, Jack, many thanks for having us. We sincerely hope that you will be able to advise us when we start our school garden. Now there we had our passage. I hope as we read that you were able to identify some of the basic things, such as the characters, the setting, the plot, and I hope that you were also able this time to read all of the words fluently. Remember, we would have done our vocabulary work on words that we did not know based on this passage. So by now, you should be quite familiar with all of the words that you just read. Now, let's go to some of the questions based on the passage that we read. Our first question: did Jack's parents give consent for the class to visit? Now, before you can answer that question, you need to understand what exactly the question is asking you about. Did Jack's parents give consent for the class to visit? Now, what does it mean when we say consent? Now, here is where your vocabulary knowledge will come in, because you have to know the meaning of the word consent. Now, are you aware of what word in the passage would give us a hint on where we can find the answer? Yes, permission. The word permission in the first paragraph of the story is the same as consent. So, did Jack's parents give permission for the class to visit? Did they? Yes, they did. Now, why do you say that? Now, we could easily answer this part of the question because we would have linked the word consent to have the same meaning as permission. So, consent and permission are synonyms. And so, because of that, we're able to say that, yes, we know that Jack's parents gave permission or consent for the class to visit. So we move on to question 2. Where was the kitchen garden found? Now, if we ask the question of where, we're talking about a place. So we want to know where exactly was the kitchen garden. And if you read in the second paragraph of the passage, the kitchen garden was situated at the back of the house. But in this response to the question, you would also realize that the word found was not used. Again, we're using a synonym. In the question, a synonym was used. So where was it found, meaning where was it situated, where was it located? The kitchen garden was situated at the back of the house. So I hope that you were following and you're taking note on how much your vocabulary is important. Number 3, where did Jack make the opening remarks? Opening remarks. Now let's go to the passage and see where did Jack make his opening remarks. Now, can we find another word for the phrase or the term opening remarks? When do we give opening remarks? It means before you go and do something, it's the opening. So, what is the word that was used in the passage that would help us to understand that Jack made his opening remarks? The word introductory. If you look at the first paragraph again, in the very last sentence, the very last line as a matter of fact, the word introductory remarks about the garden. So there we see that Jack made his opening remarks under the shade at the side of the house. He made his opening remarks under the shade at the side of the house. And opening remarks there is the same as introductory remarks. List the steps that Jack and his father took in preparing the kitchen garden. List the steps that Jack and his father took in preparing the kitchen garden. So this question is basically asking all of the things that Jack and his father did in the preparation process of the garden. So the steps that Jack and his father took in preparing the garden were, well, first they cleared the land of weeds and grass. Well, obviously they couldn't plant their vegetables among the weeds and grass, so they had to clear the land. What did they do after that? Secondly, they dug drains. Thirdly, they made rows of beds. Then they plowed the beds. And finally, they spread manure that they collected over the bed. So if you realize this is giving everything step by step, because that's what the question asks. They ask you to list the steps. So you had to reflect on your passage again to see what were the things that Jack and his father did. So if you look carefully in paragraph 3, it would have given you all the things that they did before they actually planted their garden. Remember, the preparation process would be what they did in order to plant. So, what did they do to prepare the garden? Next question. What type of plants were planted near the fence? Now, there was a particular part in the passage that spoke about vines and climbers. Now, you would want to think that the fence is around the garden and it's just there to keep the garden enclosed. But there were some specific things that Jack explained that they planted near the fence. They planted those vines and climbers. Now, why were those planted there? Think about it. They're described as vines and climbers. I'm sure that you have experience of vines in and around your environment, as well as those plants that you call climbers. Climbers meaning that they would grow up onto things. So why did they plant them there? So that they would grow onto the harbor that was built, so that they will have somewhere to run. Now the next question, why were seed boxes used? Seed boxes were used to manage the amount of sunlight exposure on the plants until they were strong enough or they were sturdy. Remember, he said that they planted in the seed box to allow the seedlings to become strong enough or sturdy enough before they put it on. And too much sunlight, if you know, at the early stage of the plant can cause them to die. So they covered them with the coconut leaves in the seed box. It was easy for them to manage. I hope you're following how these questions are being answered so far. So seed boxes were used to manage the amount of sunlight exposure on the plants until they were strong enough to be replanted. The next question, is the kitchen garden an economic venture? And why do you think so? Let me read that again. Is the kitchen garden an economic venture? Again, you have to know the meaning of your words. Now look at that word. It might be unfamiliar, so it strikes us very quickly. Economic. What does the word economic imply? Economic has to do something with money. And how do we get money? Either we work or we sell something. So, was there anywhere in the passage that indicated that the garden became an economic venture? Yes, there was a part in the passage that indicated to us that money was earned from the garden. Jack sold some of the vegetables. So while they used some, they also were able to earn money by selling some of their produce. So the kitchen garden was an economic venture for Jack and his family. And the next question, list 3 factors mentioned in the passage that contributed to the healthy growth of plants. Do you remember in the passage when Jenny spoke about how the plants look quite green? Now, plants looking quite green, we would say that they are very healthy. Now, how did that happen? What were the factors that contributed to this? 3 factors that contributed to the healthy growth of the plants were ensuring that the plants always had sufficient water. Remember, Jack spoke about that. Regular application of cow manure to the plants, which was used as fertilizer. Remember, he spoke of his father not wanting to use insecticides and artificial fertilizers, but the cow manure is very good. And ensuring that the beds were cleaned and cleared of weeds, which could affect the growth of plants. So those were 3 factors mentioned in the passage that contributed to the healthy growth of the plants. Well, pupils, that's our lesson for today. Remember, being able to understand what you read can only be demonstrated by answering questions. Use your reading and comprehension skills, such as skim and scanning, which we did, to help you find the answers for questions asked. Until another time, stay safe and be sure to use the QuizMe app to help you test your knowledge on various concepts. This is all from me, once again, Ms. Shamshadeen. Goodbye.